Good afternoon, everyone, and it's good to see most of these faces. It's faces I know, and I'm always happy, being around people you're comfortable, talking about something you all have a common interest in. So, like Onchuru said, my name is Aloys. I work at the Kenya Red Cross, that is at the Boma International Strategy College. I'm a lecturer there. I teach hospitality. But over and above that, like she said, I'm also an educator, a certified educator with WSET. And I don't want to mention it, but I'm also a student at level 4. So, great. Now, what we're going to discuss about in this session is on the business of food and wine. You can't mention wine and leave out food, and you can't mention food and leave out the wine. Let's just say beverage in general, but for purposes of today, we're talking about wine. Okay? So with us is Miss Judy Ngene. She's the CEO of Galina Wines. She's going to tell us more about herself. We have Mr. Richard Mwangi, who's a director at Suva Brands. And then, of course, Miss Kalika, Ruparelia, the CEO at MIA, My Wines. Okay. So very quickly, I hope you have a mic there. Just introduce yourself in a minute or two, and let's get to know who you're talking about here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aloys. He was actually my classmate in level 3, so it's so nice to have you be my teacher now. Hi, everyone. My name is Judy Ngene. I'm the CEO of Galina Agencies, which is a family-owned importation business. We've been in the business for 15 years now. My mom started it. I joined her about 8 years ago. And loving the experience, I've learned a lot. I think that's the biggest character development you can get, like being an importer, especially a small one. It's not for the faint-hearted. Other than that, I'm also a co-founder of the Wine Fair, which is a consumer wine event where we give an opportunity for the consumers to interact directly with the importers. Most recently, we started bringing in wine producers where they can actually showcase their wines and see if there's interest and a need for them to actually pursue Kenyan importers. Because I know as an importer, that's one of the most annoying things when a producer is disturbing you and you're like, listen, first meet the consumers. If they love your brand, then we can have a conversation from there. I think most recently, I introduced my private label, Lollie Wines, named after myself, Lollie. And it's more of a brand I introduced to bring in a more relatable wine. We've been talking about everyone thinking wine is bougie. So try to look at something that's easily palatable, something that can introduce these Gen Zs or the people who don't drink much or who are afraid of wine into coming into wine. So once they have something to cross over with, then they can move towards the drier styles of wine. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Richard, over to you.
Hi everyone. My name is Mwangi. I started my wine journey about 8 years ago, and I started from the restaurant space. He didn't mention. I've been running the Leleshwa Getaway for about 8 years now. Now my wine journey started is when the Leleshwa was in construction. I met these 3 people who told me, if you want to have good wines, you must stop doing gym. So the first person told me that, I ignored. Second person tells me that, I ignored. But that person told me that, I was like, okay, let me call her now. We had a conversation about wines, and I made a few promises to her that I only sell good wines. Now, for that reason, I've worked with some of you, worked with Washera, I saw Modoni, I know Wine Shop is joining us in a few. It's from that, then when I started the wine journey at the restaurant, then I got to understand the opportunity for import. And then I did a lot of research, like we all do, a lot of Excel worksheets, a lot of planning. I'm going to have a lot of money, and I'll start importing. But then distribution was the low-hanging fruit. So I got into distribution, meaning we're selling other people's products, they're imported, maybe they're too big, then they feel someone needs to do the last mile for them. And business, we have a way of talking back to you. So doing distribution, then I come across this supermarket where they're struggling with all these wines are too many, suppliers are too many, they have nice stories, my wines are good, they fly off the shelf. But that's a story. Again, for the Excel worksheets. So then they were very tired, they told me they want to do something. Take over the entire wine portfolio. So right now the business I'm doing more than distribution is aggregation. If you're not working with me, we need to talk. So my company, my wine distribution company, Suva, we are the wine partners for Gaza Supermarket. We have 20 outlets. So I'm the guy trying to figure out which one to sell in Kayole, what to sell in Leleshwa, and what to sell on the highway. So we can talk about that. Again, moving forward, I see a lot of supermarkets go in that direction. They've already done it with vegetables, they've already done it with meat. No one wants to have 20 meat suppliers because you have rabbit, you have quail. So even wine, that's the direction things will go. So let's figure out how to work together, collaborate. Some people have come through in a big way, and others have said we don't supply to other distributors, which is fine, it's their model, but it is what it is. That's my story.
Okay, over to you.
Thanks, Aloys. Good morning, good afternoon. So my name is Kalika Ruparelia, and I have been in the wine industry now for 22 years. So you guys can guess how old I am, but I have been here a long time, and I have seen it all and done it all. Where the done it all comes from is very simply, we make Mara wines in South Africa, so we actually operate 2 vineyards. And we harvest once a year and we make wine, and I'm actually in the process of just making our current vintages of the Maranyope and the Marankundu, which will hit the market in September this year. And we are also importers for different brands. So we have, in the last 22 years, brought and dropped over 45 brands into the Kenyan market. We have serviced the entire range. From your small liquor shop to the big supermarkets to, I don't know how many of you lost money in Nakumat. And like Mr. Alphonse, I am an accountant by profession. Steph is laughing because when she used to do stuff for me, I used to be like, Steph, show me the numbers, show me the numbers. And so I have to say this as the representative of the Mwangi accounting community. If you have money and you don't want to work very hard, please put it in a fixed deposit because the profitability is 10%. You're getting 10% for doing nothing. We work very, very hard in this industry, especially now for our money. I'm sure everybody agrees. The margins are not what it was. It's a very different space. Obviously, there's a lot of competition, KRA, cabs, logistics, international wars, all of it is still happening. So if you're looking to make a quick buck, I do not advise this to you. This industry for you, I think if you're in this for the long term and you are resilient and you're willing to do what it takes to adapt, then that is definitely the space to be in. Where I see myself now more than our business is we are now saying something called Wine to Africa, which we're looking at changing the conversation around, is Africa just a dumping ground? You know, like somebody mentioned earlier that, I think it was Perpetua mentioned that, somebody went to South Africa and bought white wine that was cheap, right? I think our focus needs to be on, we don't want to be the dumping ground for the West. You know, we don't want to be that. So Wine to Africa is basically going to be focused on bringing international players to the African continent. I know everybody thinks Mara is Kenyan, and unfortunately it isn't, and I can explain that to you quickly. Very simply, we tried to grow grapes here. I'm from a farming background. We export avocados and things to the UK and to Holland, and flowers as well, so my family's in farming. And basically, when we tried to grow grapes here, we were told we had to put a bit of cyanide into the vine to create a dough. And we were sitting there going, we drink the most wine, and most of our own wine is drunk by the family. Maybe we don't want to do this. We actually didn't do it, and that's why I ended up in South Africa, because we just said, you know, it's safe. The whole idea with making Mara South African is safe, it's controlled, you know, and it's still African. At the end of the day, I think a big thing that I feel as a 4th generation Kenyan and a 4th generation African is that we are not proud to be African, right? We don't support African. You know, like you see a Tanzanian wine, you don't go and say, okay, it's from Africa, let me buy it. Or, you know, you see these beautiful clothes that the Ugandans wear, we don't say, oh, let me go and buy Ugandan clothes. We need to be a bit more proud of our continent. So I think that is something that is top of mind for me today. So thank you.
Good. Great. So, of course, we know Kenya is a robust market at the moment for the business of food and wine. And the gentleman and lady seated here, and those of you seated over there who otherwise have sat here, we all start this business for profit. I mean, bottom line. Okay. Apart from maybe a very small percentage that will do it not for profit or for whatever reason, either to support another business or something like that. Okay. So starting with you, Rachel, you said you're that person who's looking at knowing which wine is meant for the supermarket in Kayole, which one is meant for the supermarket at Lavington or Langata or the other place. How do you get the difference in terms of which wine do you take where? Of course, we've got the big brands. We're going to mention names here, the Priorans and all that. But then we have got the entry level brands. So how do you tell what to take where?
Okay, starting off as a distributor, then you realize you have a portfolio that's fixed. In fact, distributors is even better. You can have a bigger portfolio from several people. If you're an importer, then as she said, she has 145 different products. So then you're limited. I only have 45 products, then why do I place them? So then what that means, you must create a market for your 45 products. In the last 6 weeks, then what I've actually realized, you should ask yourself, what do customers want? I have all these friends of mine who have all these nice products, don't sell to me. So what I've been doing is then I would walk to Katani, I'll go to Karen, I'll go to Ogai, and I'll enter about 5 wines and spirits shops. So I'm looking at what are they selling. The beauty about it, once I see what they're selling, I know who the suppliers are. They're my friends. That is the portfolio I number one need there, because that's what they're buying. Then I ask myself, what don't they have? And there's an opportunity. You get, someone talked about placing wine in Kagame with me placing wine in Kilimani. You go to Kilimani and look at all those tall apartments, ask yourself, my friends who stay out in the evening come hang out with them. But then when you go to Milema Drive again, you realize there are also those very tall apartments. The difference is that on one side, they could be spending 4-5 on a Friday, on the other side, they're happy to spend 2,000 shillings. So then what then I bring to the table as an aggregator, I have, as in, there's no wine that's special to me. People come to a flagship store and ask me, you supply all this? I'm like, I show so much love to Caprice. It's my best seller. You get. So what then I've asked myself is, if you split it up into 4, you have wines that are costing between 20,000 shillings and 835 shillings. They're all yours. You're the ones who's placing them on the shelf. What does the consumer in that neighborhood want? Because the little mistake you make is to assume they have no money. There's this theory that, how Kenyans do the homeownership journey. You buy a plot, you save for 3 years, then you start building. Once you've done the roof and the windows, then move in. So what then that translates to is that couple has more disposable income than the person who did the easier route off. Let's do the mortgage, then you pay very high mortgage. So you might actually then miss an opportunity of selling more expensive wines in Kitengera and Thika Road and Ogata Ogai and the Kabura. So really the question for me is what do consumers want? Then something else I've also done, trying to make it scientific. We go to our store and tell consumers, spend 4,000 shillings, we'll do a wine tasting for you. So I've come across consumers then who are drinking, they buy a different wine a day. For me, from where I sit, I would like to drink one type of wine. That's how we're wired. But then I've come across guitarists who are drinking a different wine a day. The wine just started the other day, so they asked the shop attendant, what should I drink today? You get. So for me, it's really about what consumers want more than what you're selling. But now that can only work for you if then you're aggregating or you're distributing work with many people. Because now, 6 weeks ago, December last year, my portfolio was constrained to I have state products. If you don't buy from this portfolio, then our friendship will be tested. Okay, so it's a bit different. But no matter point where I'm more focusing on the consumer to avoid also her supplying me the products that sit on the shelf. I'm not able to pay her, then we get into problems. I would rather tell her, let's get realistic here. Let's look at our portfolio. Honest opinion, where do we place these products? Because if you get that right, then everybody's happy. Every 2 weeks you're able to pay them, and every 2 weeks your shelves are empty. So what I've sort of done is, number one, I've removed emotions from what people want. So, and once you tell me what you want, then I go looking for what you want. But that works from now, from the new me. Deep down in the middle of the night, then I still ask myself, what about my portfolio? So that's what I'm saying.
Okay, so before I come to Ms. Kalika here on the challenges on importing and all that, just as a follow-up question, but now to Judy. In the previous conversation, there was the issue of there's no data sharing or maybe there's no data, and even if it is there, it is not reachable to some of us. I know you recently introduced one of your brands, that is the Lollie wines that you just mentioned. So, how did you come? What came into your mind? How did you think it will make it? Where did you get this data? Was it a dream? Was it a street talk, like Richard said?
Very simple. The struggle of selling dry wines in Kenya. I was like, there's a problem here. You're not pushing as much volumes. Of course, I had a lot of data which we get from different supermarket chains, and I was like, listen, we don't want to go home tomorrow. If this is the way we're going to get people into the wine world, then let's do it. So it's something, actually, I think when I started working with my mom, I think one of the first people I met actually was Kalika and your mom. I was in university and my mom took me there to look at what these guys are doing, which was, really interesting for me. And when I joined her in importation, that time we were only importing one brand from South Africa. And I just kept thinking, I want something that I can call my own, because as an importer, we do so much work for these people. Like, we do so much work for the producers, and sometimes they don't really appreciate that. They'll ditch you with the drinks. Everything they promised you doesn't really come into fruition after some time. And I'm like, you know what? Let me slave for something that's mine. So yes, we'll tap into that market. That's what Kenyans want. We give them. Something else I also tell most of the producers we work with. I'm like, you guys will send me your portfolio. Bombard my email with all these different brands that you're introducing. However, have you thought about what the consumer wants? So you can give me what you want me to sell, but then what does the consumer want? So I just mixed those two together and I brought in Lollie wine.
Interesting. To you, Ms. Kalika, now, there's been conversation in the room around importation, and today I learned that you can actually have a bottle of something in a sack of charcoal or whatever it is. So, in a nutshell, what challenges do you get in terms of logistics? Of course, we're not here to discuss government in terms of taxes and all that, but of course, it is a challenge out there. So, what strategies do you use just to make sure that you're underpinning the challenges, you're cutting through the taxes, and bottom line, you're making the profit and your customer is happy?
Okay, so with 22 years of importation, so I have to be honest and say I do my own importation. I have since we started. I learned it from the ground up. Okay, so I have seen regimes come and go. I have seen now in the last story, since we've had wars. And I would possibly say that logistics is probably one of the hardest parts of importation because there's so much you cannot control. So for example, and this is a very current situation, Israel and Iran right now throwing bombs at each other. What is happening on the shipping lines, right? Where are the vessels being rerouted, right? I was expecting a container next week. Well, sorry, maybe you'll get it end of August. So those are the conversations that we don't plan for, we don't prepare for, because we finance, right? Again, I'm going back to profitability, accounting, maths, numbers. I know Onchuru's going to throw something at me soon. But the reality is your cash is stuck, right? So you need to have a good, strong logistics partner. You need to understand the risks involved. You also need to have a contingency plan in terms of money to say, okay, you know what? I need to hold this stock because maybe I'm going to miss Valentine's Day, or maybe I'm going to miss Christmas and I'm going to miss this year's. So these are all things that need to that play before the stock actually even gets here, before your whole logistics issue happens, and before you even start dealing with Kenyan ports and you deal with KEBs and you send your bottles for testing and you do all of that. And then KRA obviously will have, today we're not issuing stamps, we're doing stock take, right? And KEBs will say, I'm sorry, but we're not going to give you your little KEB sticker number today, so you can't send it for printing. And then the printer says, so look, logistics and delivery, there's so much that comes into it. And it's not easy, and it's not for the faint-hearted. I know recently we imported wines for California, the California wine tasting, and it was an issue again because you're bringing 3 bottles for an event. You need to have all these tests done. Those tests are expensive. The COC is so expensive. And we recently had an issue at the Portuguese wine event last week where the wines didn't come. So I rock up at this event and there's no wine. And I'm like, guys, it's a wine event. What's going on? You guys are supposed to be exhibiting Portuguese wines. And they said, oops, they're still stuck at the airport. I'm like, well, then you need partners like myself to help you make sure it's people who've done it before, to make sure that when you have these events, the wine is already there. It's now a service we are actually offering. But I think when my biggest nugget for you would be when you're doing importation and working with logistics is planning. Best case scenario, pop, everything happens. Worst case scenario, we get the wine in 6 months. And it happens. So please don't get me wrong. We've had containers leave South Africa and get lost on the way. Dude, you cannot lose a container. It's 20 foot. It's half the size of this room. How do you lose a container? And I've had to fly down and go, oh, this is my container in Pretoria. It's there. That's Yangu Te. Send it to Kenya, And only because somewhere along the line, somebody wasn't keeping an eye, or I dropped the ball for a second, and boom, we forgot where the container was. Like we were expecting, where is it? So I think having a dedicated person and understanding all the challenges, and somebody who's experienced also, because there are things that are not in our control right now. I said to somebody over the break, I said, we grow grapes in South Africa, right? And it's just not profitable anymore. Like we would make for a lot more money if we grew pomegranate. Pomegranate is far more, the yield is much better, the return per kilo is much higher. So it's something that you need to think about. Money is obviously important in all of it, but how much you spend, obviously, and what your return is important too. So.
Wow, thank you for that. I know, of course, locally there's a conversation on, Glovo and Uber and all that, and most of us have ordered wines through those channels, and they have their own challenges and all that. But anyway, that is a conversation which Onchuru will organize for another time. So, to you, Judy, let's talk about education here. But now we're not educating the sommelier or the salesperson or that other person. We want to educate the customer here. Okay. What is that one misconception about the Kenyan wine drinker? And what do you think brands should do to educate the customer and tell them, hey, listen, I know we are Kenyan market and we love sweet things. But, not all the time is time for sweet things. There's a time for sour things and time for bitter things and a time for other things. Over to you.
Okay. So I have two. One of them is the best wines are the ones that are most expensive. So I get many calls, even from close friends, like, listen, it's my boyfriend's birthday or whoever's birthday, and I want to get them a gift. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, where are you exactly? Tell me what you can see, right? They're like, no, but there's this one that's 15,000. I'm like, what's the name? They say, and I'm like, what? And they're stuck on it. And as much as I'll advise, they're like, no, let me get the expensive one. Even when they check the price online, they'll say, I really went out of my way, which is actually a huge misconception. I think, Vicky, you could address that if it's okay, about the whole thing of price versus quality. If I'm allowed to step out of the panel on this one.
The second, will guide.
We'll do that as the first person to speak in
on
the panel.
that, yeah, because I think
sure.
it's a big deal. The second one is all sweet wines are bad. That one is also a big thing that's there, especially when you're dealing with the consumer. And I'm talking about these wine tastings we do, Of course, the people who will come for wine tastings or wine events, even the wine fair, are people who've been exposed to wine. So it's not, yes, there are first-time wine drinkers there, but most of the people there love their dry wines. And I know many people, actually, I think importers would say this best. Most of the wines they sell on the day are actually dry wines, because people are coming from a point of, I love wine and this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
The problem comes in, for example, you have like a Moscato d'Asti or even ice wine, and they're like, this is sweet. No, it's bad. You've already categorized. So in terms of education, we still have a long way to go. In that, even the sweet wines, we need to give or explain more these categories, in that you can have. And that's the reason why Moscato d'Asti will be as expensive as a premium red dry wine. Yeah.
Okay. So when we come back to the audience, you'll also address the issue on how best do we educate the customer? What do we need to do? What do the importers and producers need to do in terms of educating the customer? All right. So Mr. Kalika here. So there is on trade and off trade, and I know we have salespeople who can define what that is. What would you say in terms of Kenya? Where do you think the business is going? Is it going on the on trade market? Or is it going to the off-trade market? And if not, how do you balance the two?
Okay, so I think these are two very different channels. We all drink wine here, and we all buy wine in supermarkets, and we all go to restaurants, and we spend a lot of money on wine. But I think there's one general underlying thing that, as consumers, forget business people in the industry, that we will all agree on, is that we don't want to feel cheated. Okay, so if I go to the supermarket and I can buy a bottle of wine at 1,000 shillings, I don't really want to spend 4,500 shillings when I drink the same bottle of wine in a restaurant. The attraction is not there. I feel cheated. Dude, I know what the price is. I'm not foolish. So I think the first categorization that needs to happen is that this is for on-trade and this is for off-trade, so that people can actually enjoy the experience and be willing to pay that, so they understand what they're paying for when they go into a restaurant, for example. In terms of categories right now, I personally believe that on-trade is flourishing far more than retail. I think retail is really struggling this year, particularly, and this is from conversations with fellow importers. Retail has definitely struggled this year. And there are two things that are probably happening. One is the liquidity in the market is much less. But the reality is we still need to live. We still need a reason to be happy. We still need to go out. We still need to eat. So if we're going to go out and we're going to have a meal, okay, we can't do the whole bottle, going to the supermarket, get a bottle. But you know what? We'll have a glass. Maybe we'll have 2 glasses. So I think definitely the space to look at right now is on-trade. And again, comes with a caveat, look at it, but obviously follow up for payment. There's a lot of issues. I've had customers in the last 6 months who've been buying from me for 2 years, and then we go to pick up a check and the business is shut down. We can't find anybody, and that is also a risk, right? It is a risk. But I think definitely on-trade going forward, especially in my opinion, what's happened in the last 22 years. 22 years ago, if you asked us how much rosé wine we brought in 20 cases a year, and it would take us the whole year to sell 20 cases. Now we can bring in 2,000 cases and sell 2,000 cases of rosé wine. So, but that has happened not because of anything other than education. Thanks to Onchuru and staff and guys who are doing, yourself also doing so much education. But where is that education happening? Is it happening in the supermarket? Yes, but also it's happening in on-trade, restaurants, bars. People are actually tasting the product and saying, okay, you know what? I can now go and buy it from the retailer, right? Because that's where most of the education is happening, in my opinion. And that's what's driving what is being bought in the retail sector.
Great. I know this panel is standing between you and your lunch. So we're on the last question here. Okay. So very quickly, in terms of trend, let's talk about where are we going in terms of organic. Ms. Vicky here spoke about no alcohol or low alcohol. People are talking about sustainability and all these things. Where do you think this market is going? That is to you and Richard randomly, just very quickly.
So yes, of course, let me say that the organic sustainability has been a trend, I think, in the other parts of the world where there's wine production happening, and it's quickly catching on here as well. Like we have more requests and more wows, like, oh, this wine is organic, okay, like let me have that. And I know some retailers like Green Spoon, that's something they look into, which is a good thing, because that means they're responding to a demand from the market. So yes, we're going that direction. Something else about a global trend, because I read your questions earlier. I'd like to speak on the recognition of lesser known wine producing countries, which is now becoming a big thing. People are more open to hearing, okay, there's wine from Montenegro, there's wine from Serbia, there's wine from Croatia, and for us, we import wine from Serbia, which has been going really well. We had the opportunity to visit with Joy and Kelvin, and I know they had a really good experience going into those vineyards that you never even imagined that there's something that big happening there in terms of production. And you can see the decanter awards are into it. They're going there, trying out these wines, making sure they have that platform. And the interesting bit is now Kenyans are curious. For me, it's interesting because the Serbian wines is one of my fastest moving wines, which is, we didn't expect it. That means the curiosity is there. And I mean, as importers, I think it's time for us to feed into that curiosity. Let's not just do the normal, you know, French wines, South Africa, Italy. Let's look at this other, because if you don't give Kenyans a way to like express themselves or explore, and then how are we really helping the market in the long term?
Interesting. Would you want to add something, Richard?
Yeah, two things. I'll comment on the issue of sustainability. There's this movement about vegan wines, organic wines. If you ask me, I've not seen a value for money organic wine. I had a chance of visiting Alpha at his winery in South Africa. And the winemaker, Kalika, says our wines are vegan. So I said, then how come it's not on the label? She told me we pay so much to get that certified. So for those who are paying, you pass that cost to the consumer. I think for the Kenyan market, it's market sensitive. We are growing the market. Let's first get more people to drink wine. Then once everybody is drinking wine, then we start saying it's vegan or organic. But in terms of how to grow the industry again, I told you now I'm selling everything. So my next product that I fell in love with is Dose of Claret. Everybody is drinking it. So ask Kelvin, we never used to drink this thing when I university. How come people are drinking it now? He told me remove the cork, we put the screw cap. Convenience. I sell a lot of wines in the petrol stations. What are Subaru boys drinking? Do Subaru boys have wine openers? No, they don't. So you have to think, you have the renovation. You have to pack a wine in cans, you have the convenience. Also ask yourself, your young brother, straight out of campus, he has a party in his house. Does he have a wine opener? No. So you need something you can just pop and go. I think canned wines, right now they're probably still too expensive, but that's the future. You pick a 6-pack, I pick my 6-pack of wines. You can imagine the trauma of picking a wine on the highway. You get Naivasha, you realize you don't have a wine opener. What do you do? Now you start putting it with your shoe, you start boiling it. So I think also let's tell our suppliers to get innovative in the way they're packaging wines. Let the wine be good. I'm not saying you drink bad wines, but where are people drinking wines? They're drinking at Gemi Festival, they're drinking all sorts of places. And if you look at how Ibero has responded, you have a lot of RTDs. If you look at the RTD, there's some zinger, there's water, and there's some sweetener. Now, who carries these 3 sweeteners? They'll pour on you when you're doing 120 kilometers an hour. I'm not saying you drink when you're driving. You can hire a driver. But the RTD makes it convenient. The driver is a designated driver, but everybody else is enjoying the drink as they go. So wine, we should go that direction.
Great. So now, off the panel now, I'll only take one question from this side. Okay, and one here. But before we go to the 2 questions, Vicky, you were to tell us something. Okay, just add on in terms of is expensive wine, is it about quality, and how best do we educate the consumer?
So I'll answer that in the context of this market. Yes and no. No with capital N-O, because of course we know what the cost of wine here is and what the markups are. And then, taste is relative anyway. So you can't say that's the best one because it's at that price point. We always talk about, as Richard said, but what does the consumer want? What flavors or sensation in the palate do they want? And invariably, we've just determined that this country loves fruity, sweet wines. A lot of wines that are priced at that price point will not please so many people. They're actually just sommelier wines, expert wines. They might not give as much pleasure to, a crowd of people. So with that, I say no. However, if you know your wines and there are certain wines that are just produced in very small production by celebrity winemakers who have been doing this for such a long time. They win high accolades, and therefore the demand and supply is, doesn't match. There's more demand than the supply is. Of course, principles of economics, that will be a very expensive bottle of wine, and it's been made well by a fantastic person within a specific estate, so that will definitely cost a lot more money. When we go to the on-trade, that always never rings true. It's not the most expensive wine on the wine list that will be the best wine. In fact, I always advise people look at the mid-priced item on the and go for that. That will give you a lot more pleasure with less guilt for how much you're spending. So I think in summary, what we're saying is drink what you like at the price point that you can afford, as opposed to us just pushing this narrative of expensive is the best.
Thank you.
Well, hi everyone. I've really enjoyed this session. My name is Yvonne. I learned some new phrase this morning, liquid on lips. So I call myself a lip representative of the consumers. So Judy focus in trauma. That's why we think all sweet wine is bad. But anyway, the question I wanted to ask is, I'm hearing a lot of numbers from this panel, the previous panel. How exactly is the wine industry trying to understand me? Because the figures I'm hearing are around how much product you're pushing or not pushing. So is anyone collecting data around nuances around preferences? And I know it's not easy, like with beer, you probably have 5 types of beer. You decide this is how you'll push White Cup, this is how you'll push Heineken. Wine is not the same. So I'm not hearing, like, how exactly are you trying to understand me around why I picked this wine instead of that wine?
So I think what we are doing to understand our consumer is actually, obviously, when we sell wine, we get data. So we know that if we're selling a lot more sweet wine, that's what the market wants. If we're selling much more chocolate block, for example, we're like, oh, okay, suddenly there's a situation around, okay, people are willing to spend more on chocolate block because it's a much more expensive wine. So obviously our data comes from our sales, right? But that said, I think there's a huge initiative of observation that's also happening right now. So, like when you go into a store, so for example, one of my supermarket clients, we couldn't understand who was buying our wine because we're like, this is not in your traditional wine drinking area. And it just so happens that, somebody says, I'm sitting in the store and who came in and bought our wine, and he was a Somali warrior who was putting it in a brown bag, and I'm like, what? But when did Somalis start drinking wine? Like, this is new. I didn't know that. So a lot of observation is happening around that, saying, okay, and then obviously, Ramadan happens and your sales are 60% down. We're like, dude, Somalis are drinking my wine? Who's drinking my wine? So, but that said, there's a lot of, so we came up with a sweet wine product a couple of years ago called Mara Tamu. Okay, so sweet Mara. And what we did to make it different, and I'm sure some of you have tasted it, is we made it slightly sparkling, right? Because we'd seen so many people take red wine and add Sprite or add Fanta or whatever they were adding to it, just to make the wine sweeter, to make whatever they were drinking sweeter. And I said, well, what if we did that? We created a low alcohol wine. And low alcohol meaning it's 8%, so it's not your traditional 12%. But we made it sweeter, we made it sparkling, and it's doing fantastically well for us because people are like, okay, it's convenient, it's screw cap. I can open it, drink it, I can drink it at college, I can take it wherever I want. It's easy to drink, serve chilled, it tastes amazing. And we only did it in a red and a rosé. Again, the Moscato d'Asti draws. And it's affordable, right? Like, when you go out, and I said this to someone a couple of days ago, when I go out with my husband on a Friday night, I don't want to spend 10,000 shillings per head. I just don't want 20,000 shillings a meal. Even for me, it's like, listen, 20,000 shillings, that's somebody's salary. That's a lot of money. Like, what value am I getting? Am I getting the most amazing experience? Like, if you translate that to dollars, that's $150 experience. Am I getting $150 experience? Probably not. So the way we're thinking about it is, what experience are we giving you? And we're basically saying, can we give you an experience that you would pay for?
Okay, last question. This time. Who was that? Who was that person?
It was Victoria.
Okay.
But you're coming next. You'll tell us when you come. Sorry.
Okay.
Maybe
So
a quick summary. I'm sorry. I am going to be the enemy today. Yeah, in that regard. Just some quick summary, but it's clearly we need like 3 days for this.
yeah.
Or like one topic a day. But please go on. Just summarize for us quickly and then.
Okay. Thank you very much, the panel and the audience. I know there's quite a lot. We haven't even spoken about food. How to combine the wine into the food and all that. And I'm sure, like Onchuru said, there's going to be more of these sessions. Maybe in that day we just be talking about food and all that. Thank you very much. And yeah.
Thank you, guys.
So enjoy your lunch.
Thank you. Wow.